So hey, if you've got a Bible this morning, I would invite you to turn to the Gospel of John. John chapter 9 is where we're going to start, but we're going to spend most of the morning in John chapter 10. If you don't have a Bible, I'm going to have every verse on the screen for you so you can read along with me. And while you're turning there, I like to introduce myself at the start of every sermon. So if you're new here, welcome. We're glad that you're here. My name is Doug Robinson. I'm the lead minister here at Sugar Grove. And after service today, I'm actually going to be teaching a Bible class, so I won't be able to meet you this morning. But if you fill out that New Here, Start Here card and you turn it in, you'll get an email from me this week that invites you to go get a cup of coffee or eat some chips and queso, which are two of my absolute favorite things, because I'd love to get to know you and tell you a little bit about Sugar Grove and who we are and what we're about, which we're going to talk about a little bit this morning. And then I always like to say hi to people who watch online, because it's a really great excuse to just say hello to my mom and dad who are in our Indiana campus, as I'm going to start calling it, because it just sounds better. So hello to our Indiana campus across the nation. Sugar Grove goes. Love you both very much. And then, hey, if you're in Houston, I would like to invite you to come to our Houston campus. You can totally go to the Indiana campus. My mom would make you a cup of coffee. She's very nice. But come out. We start church at 9, which means most of us gets here around 9:15, and we'd love to have you out if you're in the Houston area. So come try us out. So we're in this series called "That You May Believe," where we've taken this phrase from the very end of the Gospel of John. John has put together this book that we've been reading because he is just beyond convinced that Jesus is who he says he was, and that he has made a difference on a global scale and can make a difference on a very personal scale as well. And so he actually says, I've written all of this down that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Son of God and that you may find and have life in him. And so we're just kind of walking our way through the gospel as we make our way to Easter as well. And we're going to pick it up here in John chapter 9 this morning, starting in verse 26. So if you got a Bible, 9:26 is where we're going to start. Here in chapter 9, a blind man has been made well. He can now see, and it's a conversation taking place between this blind man and some Jewish leaders who we have learned over the last couple of chapters are beginning to oppose Jesus. So as Jesus walking this earth and he's doing his ministry, there are those who respond and come to faith and believe, and then there are those who are saying actually no to what Jesus offers, and this is a conversation that's taking place. They asked him, the formerly blind man, what did he, Jesus, do to you? How did he open your eyes? I already told you, he said, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples too, do you? And so they ridiculed him. You're that man's disciple, but we're Moses' disciples. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but this man, we don't know where he's from. We start here this morning for a couple of reasons. Number one is it just gives me an excuse to have us all celebrate and thank Andy Dunham for his sermon last week. So y'all cheer for Andy Dunham. I'm super biased because I love this guy, but he's a fantastic preacher. His passion for Jesus and for the word, and then for us understanding it, is just awesome and contagious. And he has all these what I call Andyisms. Did you catch them during the sermons? Just things that at one point he called Abraham ya boy Abraham. Y-A-B-O-I Abraham. And then I didn't even know this was possible, but at one point he looked at the clock and said, I'm already over, so I'm just going to keep going. So get comfortable, friends. I didn't think that was an option. But thank you, Andy. We are blessed when you preach, and we love you, and we love that you love Jesus, and we love that Jesus loves you, so thank you. The other thing is I want you to kind of pay attention to the couple of things that are going on. So last week, Andy walked us through how this story of the blind man is what John would hope for us. That he starts the story unsure of who Jesus is, and by the end is worshiping Jesus himself. But then I also want you to know that there's a conversation taking place within the Jewish leaders. They're beginning to ask, who is this Jesus? They're asking that question. They're entering into a conversation with this formerly blind man about the identity of Jesus. I think that's a good question for us to ask this morning. I think a lot of us have arrived at the conclusion that Jesus is the Son of God. He is the Messiah and the one we've been waiting for. But for some of you, you're right where the Jewish leaders are. You're unsure of who Jesus is. And I think that's a great question to ask. I think that's what John wants you to ask and what he's constantly trying to answer. And so let's pay attention to that as we keep reading. Verse 30. "This is an amazing thing," the man told them. "You don't know where Jesus is from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. Throughout history, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything." They replied to him, "You were born entirely in sin," they replied, "and are you trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out. Now, Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, and when he found him, remember this for a little later on in the sermon, he asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" he asked. And Jesus answered, "You have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." "I believe, Lord," he said, and he worshiped him. So Jesus then says, "I came into this world for judgment in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind." So some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and asked Jesus, "We aren't blind too, are we? We're not blind to who you are we?" "If you were blind," Jesus told them, "you wouldn't have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains." And then chapter 10, verse 1 starts, "Truly, I tell you." So in your Bible, if you've got like a big number 10 there, and it almost makes it look like this is the start then of a new story. But as you read through John chapter 9, if there were no numbers in the text that you were reading, you would see that whatever Jesus is about to say next is tied to the conversation taking place. He's talking to a group of people who are asking about who he is. Who are you? Where did you come from? Who are you working with? What is your identity? Are you who you say you are? And there's this discussion on, well, you're blind and you don't see, but the people who are blind, they will see when they see who I am. And then he starts, "Truly, I tell you." So whatever he's about to say next is tied to this identity piece. So we're still swimming in the land of who is this Jesus? And again, I think that's exactly where John wants us to be, because he wants us to come to believe in him. So let's start chapter 10, verse 1. "Truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out." I want you to notice a couple things. One is we got a contrast taking place as Jesus kind of shifts the narrative and moves it from a thief and a robber compared to a shepherd. Then not only that, is no longer we're talking about blind and seeing, but now we're having a conversation on the idea of hearing. This word hearing, let's make sure we get it right. When I was a kid, my family taught me a phrase to use if we were in a crowded place and we needed to cry out for help. Maybe I've gotten separated from my family. Maybe I wouldn't have, because I was a good kid. So my family got separated from me, is actually how it happened. And so in moments where you were around a lot of people and you needed some help, you could use this phrase. Then very quickly it turned into, if you want to provide embarrassment for the people around you, you can just use this phrase, because it was what's that? That was my son interrupting the sermon. But also, let's just hang on. No. Paying attention in the sermon. Yes, Josiah. Thank you, Jesus. Woo! I genuinely was like, I think someone just had a prophetic word and I don't know what to do now. Because that's our phrase. So our phrase is Oli, Oli, Oli. In fact, let's all say it together on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Oli, Oli, Oli. That is the phrase. If you hear that phrase and you know to hear it, it actually brings really, really, really good news. Because you thought you were alone, and you're definitely afraid because you are alone, but now all of a sudden you hear something, and you're like, okay, now I'm not alone. Not only when you hear the phrase, Oli, 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 do you know you're not alone, you know now it's time to move. You start to figure out where is that noise coming from, and you start to work your way towards it. To hear the phrase, Oli, 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 is to obey, follow, and go towards the noise. It's not just to hear it and go, oh, there it is, Oli, Oli, Oli. It's to respond in the same way that Josiah and I did not plan this morning, but happened, where I heard the phrase Oli, 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 and my brain was like, no more preaching, who just said that, right? So it means to respond and to go towards it. And Jesus, read it again with me, truly I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. But the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep, there it is, hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Now, let me give you a little secret. From time to time, after preaching or after reading a text and hanging out with people afterwards in the Grove or going to Bible class, I'll have someone come up to me and say something to the effect of, man, it just felt like you were speaking like right to me. It just felt like you were talking like directly to me. Or man, as we were reading that text, it's like that piece of scripture was exactly what I needed to read. Or man, when we sang the chorus of that song, I didn't know that it's like you were just talking or speaking or we were singing just for me. Now, here's the secret I need to let you in on. I have never walked up here thinking to myself, oh, watch out, Bill, because I got a word for you. I love you, Bill, so I picked your name. I hope that's okay. I've never walked up thinking about one particular person in mind. I'm not capable of that. In fact, I walk up and I kind of go, God, I got some words and some stories and ideas and maybe a joke or two, and I'm going to need you to do something with it. Would you give me the faith and trust to speak confidently that as the words leave my mouth, you and being present in this space will take them, and by the time they get to a person's ear, you'll make them exactly what they needed to hear. Because we worship a God and we serve a God who calls people not in groups or in groves, but by name. And so I would tell you, you should come to church. You should come to the text. You should come to mission trips and youth events. You should come to R&R Bible classes expectant to hear a word. And I would tell you that not because we're a talented group of people. In fact, in spite of who we are, I think you should come expectant. Because we worship and serve a God who calls each and every sheep by name. So when you're starting to go like, ooh, is like God like, yes, he is. He's present. His spirit is moving. His kingdom is coming. And he is calling you specifically by name. The best part about when that happens is most of the time, I'll be honest, I don't remember even saying the thing that like God used to speak. And I'm like, cool, that's neat. So just pay attention to that. There's a little secret on preaching. All right, here we go. Let's keep going into verse 4. So this shepherd, when he has brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will never follow a stranger. Instead, they will run away from him because they don't know the voice of strangers. And so Jesus gave them this figure of speech. Remember, this group of people who's going, who are you? We're trying to figure out who this Jesus is. And so he gave them this figure of speech, this parable, but they did not understand what he was telling them. So Jesus said again, truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. So they're not understanding, they're not tracking that he's the shepherd. So he goes, here, try this on for size. I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. Now, we have here now our third I am statement in the Gospel of John, and we're kind of tracking these as we read through. So we've had I am the bread of life, we've had I am the light of the world, and now we have I am the gate for the sheep. And again, Jesus makes a transition, a shift in the parable, and we'll continue to read here in verse 7. Jesus said again, truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep didn't listen to them. I am the gate. And then this is just like, if you got a pen or a highlighter, here's the part to highlight. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture, find what they need, find sustenance and daily bread and life and light and water where they'll never be thirsty again. And again, notice the phrase, because this is huge and I think it's become commonplace, and so we might be used to it. So let's just celebrate this together as a people. If anyone, doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter what your last name is, doesn't matter how much money you got, doesn't matter what your history is, it doesn't matter. If you have breath in your lungs, you are a part of the anyone category, and the invitation from Jesus to you is, if you enter by me, you'll be saved and will come in and go out and find what it is you're looking for. That's really, really good news. Then he says, a thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come so that they may have life and have it in abundance. I am the good shepherd. Now, number one, this phrase, have life and have it in abundance, we're going to read it at the end of this series. In John chapter 20, when he says that I've written this all down, that you may believe, he then ties to it that you may have life. In fact, if you're a planner, you'll be happy to know that our next sermon series after Easter is going to explore what does it mean to have life and life abundantly in Jesus. Because Jesus says not only should you believe and you'll have eternal life, but you'll have it abundant life. What does that look like? What does that mean? That's what we're going to be talking about afterwards. And here in this section, we now have our fourth I am statement. So, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate for the sheep. And now I am the good shepherd. We'll keep reading here in verse 11. I am the good shepherd. So Jesus is now back to the shepherd imagery. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, he leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters them. This happens because he is a hired hand and he doesn't care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd. So at once, it was a contrast between the thief and robber and the shepherd, and now it's a contrast between the hired hand and the shepherd. And still present in the story is, it seems as though there's opposition taking place. There are two forces. There's what the shepherd wants, and then there's what the thief wanted earlier, and now what the wolf wants. They're still present in this version of I am the good shepherd, someone who's coming to steal, kill, and destroy, or now snatch and scatter. As I was reading this text and kind of preparing for the sermon, which already some of you are like, oh, you prepare, that's surprising. But as I was reading the text and preparing for the sermon, I really started to think honestly about us and our church. So if you don't know, our mission statement here at Sugar Grove is to be for God and for neighbor. And the reason it's to be for God and for neighbor is because that's what Jesus tells us to be about. And we've got no interest in trying to come up with something. If Jesus tells us to be about for God and for neighbor, cool, that sounds great to us. And then we rally around this mission statement. We try and be faithful to this mission statement. We're constantly asking, hey God, what would it look like to be for you and for our neighbor, both inside the walls of Sugar Grove and outside the walls of Sugar Grove? And we believe that when this happens and when we live into this and when God blesses our efforts, a byproduct of our mission statement are our 6 core values. So if you're wearing a green shirt and you can read diagonally, you would see that our 6 core values are community and diversity and generosity and service and transformation and worship. Now, let's make this exceptionally clear. None of us can force these things. None of us are good enough, skilled enough, powerful enough to make these things happen. We have these values because it is our cry to say, God, we need you in order for these things to take place. If we're going to experience community and diversity and generosity and service and transformation and worship, then God is going to take you moving, your spirit moving, and you blessing our efforts to live for God and for our neighbor, both inside and outside the walls. And when I'm reading John chapter 10, and Jesus is describing the good shepherd that lays down his life, I think I can very quickly read that as kind of a descriptive description of Jesus. I can kind of go, this is something that's true about you, Jesus, and I can forget that Jesus is often inviting me to walk this world as he did as well. That it's not just a descriptive, but it's actually prescriptive to how we should live. And in the parable, there is God's will and God's kingdom showing up, and then an adversary or one trying to ruin it. I started thinking, okay, if we were to take our core values that we're hoping God provides for us, what would it look like if the thief or the wolf were to win? What if it would look like if the thief or the robber were to show up and manipulate and disorder these byproducts? And maybe you'd come up with a different list of words, but here's the list of words that I came up with. The first one is, instead of community, we would have exclusivity. I think instead of diversity, we would find ourselves with similarity, and that would be what we always see. Instead of seeing generosity take place, we would simply see greed. Instead of service, we would see selfishness. Instead of transformation, we would see staleness. And instead of worship, we'd start to see idolatry as our hearts go after the things that are not God. And so I started thinking, I think that's what it would look like. That would be the byproduct if the good shepherd didn't win, and instead the thief and the robber and the wolf kind of had their way with the sheep in the pen. And then I started thinking, okay, so what would be like the ingredient? What would be the thing that would get us from one list to the other? And I think it's in here in John 10. Exclusivity and similarity and greed and selfishness and staleness and idolatry comes when we behave as the hired hand instead of the shepherd. When we look after ourselves first instead of the sheep, the people that we do life with. It's when we say no to the shepherd and his way of life and say yes to the hired hand. And all of a sudden this starts to come. This would be the byproduct of operating as a church like this. So here's just kind of like Doug's quarterly friendly reminder that to be a part of Sugar Grove is to bump into this feeling from time to time. I probably wouldn't have done it that way. Or the feeling of, I don't really like this song that much. Or the feeling of, it feels like that ministry is getting placed over my own. It's this feeling of, it feels like it's not about me. And then you have a decision to make in that moment. In that moment, am I going to operate as the hired hand, which means I'm going to ignore the rest of the people around me and operate in the best interest of myself? Or am I going to say, actually, the good shepherd lays down his life for the people around him. So I'm going to lay down my preferences, and I'm going to lay down how I would have done this, and because I think that's going to help the sheep, the people that I do life with, worship or operate or step into the gifts and abilities that God's given them. I thought about two examples this week. One example, the real easy one is worship. 6 months ago, it's been 6 months. In some ways it feels like it was yesterday, and sometimes it was for like 3 years ago. But 6 months ago was the end of a long conversation about how to worship together. And again, I will tell this story until Jesus comes back, that the people of Sugar Grove looked at the leadership of Sugar Grove and said, we're going to do this together. We're not going to operate as the hired hand. We're going to operate as the shepherd. And I'm going to sing some songs that I would rather not sing, or sing them in a way that I would rather not sing them, because my neighbor wants to sing them that way. And so I can worship Jesus better by worshiping the way that they want to worship Jesus. And then those people said, cool, if you'll do that for me, I'll obviously do that for you. And so I'll sing some songs the way you want to sing them, and songs from the years that were written that you like the songs that they were written. And we do this worship thing together. Another area of ministry that this takes place that I'll brag on for a second is our Bible class teachers. Y'all, our Bible class teachers, I think they love what they do. They've got me convinced that they love what they do. And they do a really good job with it, and they steward their responsibilities really, really well. And from time to time, they get an email from me, or I email the team leader, and then I make the team leader email everyone else because I'm a little nervous, that says, hey, so ministry whatever is doing something, and that's going to impact your ministry. And so in a couple of Sundays, we're not going to do your ministry so this ministry can do their thing. Our Bible class teachers in that moment have the decision to make. Will I operate as the hired hand and go, well, no, that's my ministry is most important. And so I'm going to be angry about that or bitter about that or whatever. Or they have the opportunity, and they do this every time, where they go, hey, it's not about me. It's not about my ministry. I love what I've been called to. I love teaching Bible class. But if Sugar Grove needs our ministry to take a back seat this week for the goodness of the whole flock, sure, sounds good. I'm in. And they operate as the good shepherd. So thank you to so many of you who have demonstrated and made John chapter 10 and this idea of being a good shepherd and this idea of emulating Jesus and bringing his kingdom on earth. Thank you so much for demonstrating that. I really think you have proven that by the power of the Spirit, we can live as God and neighbor and traverse through awkward and uncomfortable things and arrive together in community, in diversity, in generosity, in service, in transformation, and in worship. All right, so a little quarterly reminder. Now, let's get back to the text, because the text walks us straight to communion, which is where we're going from here. This is John chapter 10, starting in verse 11. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says, and a good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters them, and this happens because he is a hired hand and doesn't care about the sheep. But I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. So I lay down my life for the sheep. But I have other sheep that are not from this sheep pen, and I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, and then there will be one flock and one shepherd. And then Jesus says this is why my Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it up again. Note this, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own. No one forces Jesus to the cross. He walks willingly and faithfully because that's what God has called him to. And he lays down his life so that he may take it up again. See, I have the right, he says, to lay it down, and I have the right to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. And so I wrote it down this way. May we as a church mimic and represent the Good Shepherd and how we love God and care for our neighbor. And may we, church, may this tangible expression of God's kingdom, may it be an overflow of our own worship, a testimony of our rescue from the thief and wolf because of the shepherd who laid down his own life.